There we go. Beautiful. Okay. So, yeah, the aim for the second half here is to talk about Grice's theory of implicature. And to get an idea about the theory of implicature, it will be helpful to start with this distinction between saying and implicating. And as a run-up, we can think about something that's lurking in the background. I mentioned way back, I can't remember if it was in lecture 1 or even in the lecture 0, relationship between what we might think of as natural languages and something like formal languages, or idealized natural languages. And this is actually from the Grice reading, right? He characterizes the formalist as using these formal devices which possess, as he puts it, a decisive advantage over their natural language counterparts. And the decisive advantages, they're more perspicuous, they're explicitly defined, they have very clear application and elimination conditions. In that way, they're really lovely. The problem is they don't seem to capture everything, at least everything with regards to the way that we use language. As he puts it, talking about the informalist, there are many inferences and arguments expressed in natural language, not in terms of these formal devices, that are recognizably valid. And here valid could both mean in the technical sense of impossible for premises to be true and conclusion false, but also valid as in like good reasoning, like apt. So Grice says there has to be a place for this unsimplified, unsystematic version of reasoning. And you can actually get a grip on it by thinking about something we talked way back. First order, or sorry, in this case it's truth functional logic. We talk about the conjunction in formal logic. The conjunction is symmetric. It's very clear application conditions. It outputs true if both inputs are true, otherwise it's false. Similarly, the disjunction is very clear, right? Disjunction has very easy application conditions. It's only false if both inputs are false. It's also symmetric. But as we know, this does not capture many uses of OR. Because this doesn't capture exclusive OR. We have to build up to exclusive OR. And finally, perhaps the most problematic of them all, right, is the conditional, right? The way we capture if-then in our most basic formal language does not play right with natural language if-then. To give you a very silly example, right? A arrow B is true whenever the antecedent is false. Right? So if there are exactly 50 people in this room, then there are exactly 5,000 people in this room is a true if-then statement, according to this, which is weird and silly and stupid, right? So Grice is right in that the formal languages have some advantages, but they also have some disadvantages. We also have other ways to go. Again, going back to the conjunction, right? If I tell you he got drunk and drove home, that seems to suggest good timing. He got drunk and drove home, right? If he got drunk and drove home, that suggests the temporal ordering, right? It's drinking and then driving. But of course, at the level of the logic, there is no order. Conjunction is symmetric. So at the level of logic, he got drunk and drove home is the same as he drove home and got drunk. But of course, in natural language, those are radically different things. One is illegal, the other is probably what I'm going to do later. And we can give other examples, right? There's paradoxes of material implication. There's issues about or. The formal applications seem radically different than what we're conveying in the natural language. So let's try and capture that, right? there seems to be a difference between what we might think of as the entailments, or the presuppositions, and whatever's happening in these cases. Right? Again, he got drunk and drove home. Doesn't entail a particular temporal ordering. It doesn't presuppose a temporal ordering, not explicitly. But it strongly suggests, if I tell you that sentence, it strongly suggests that things went down in that order. It's not part of this sentence, but it's somehow conveyed. If you get that, you've already got the difference between saying and implicating. The saying is what's literally in the sentence. The implicating is what's suggested. What else is conveyed? So we can get a sense of it using an example from Grice, right? Suppose A and B are talking about a third friend, C, right, who's just started working at a bank. A asks B, hey, how's C doing in their new job? Right? And B says, oh, quite well, I think. He likes his colleagues and he hasn't been sent to prison yet. Right? Now, strictly speaking, that's fine. That's just some more information. But if you were A and you heard this, your pretty natural follow-up would be like, what do you mean by that? Right? And of course, it wouldn't be very helpful if B just simply repeated back that claim. What you're asking is, what are you trying to convey? In particular with that second bit, right? Why are you adding that second bit of information? Again, there's not just what is said, but there's something else. So more generally, what's conveyed is more than what is said. This additional information isn't strictly speaking there in the sentence, but it's inferred, it arises from conventional factors, it's predictable. Certain contexts, certain phrases will invite or push forward this additional stuff. So we'll use the word implicates. Implicates a verb, and we'll just use it to capture this phenomenon. When I say he got drunk and drove home, what's explicitly said is that two things happened. What is implicated is that it occurs in that order. And it's implicated simply by the order that I presented it to you. It's not there in the sentence strictly, but it's somehow packed into my utterance, my use of this sentence. So we can get a feel for it with this, right? So I'm going to pick on Amanda. We have sentence one. Amanda ate some of the cookies. What does this strictly speaking say? Well, it tells us that Amanda ate a portion of the cookies. Interestingly, that is compatible with her having eaten all of them. I could have said Amanda ate some of the cookies. In fact, she ate every one of the cookies. But if I don't add that extra bit, while it's compatible, it doesn't strictly entail it. Because I could ask, right? I could say, hey, I figured she would. I knew that. Right? So how many are left? Of course, it could also say, hey, one's truth is also compatible with Amanda didn't eat all the cookies. She just ate one. She showed some restraint. Rare, but still possible. So that was to the county. Again, she'll never watch it, it's fine. But again, do we start to see it, right? So the implicature, if I say Amanda ate some of the cookies, is that she didn't eat all of them. But what is actually said is compatible with her having eaten all of them. The implicature is what gets you from 1 to 3. Because most of the time, if I say Amanda ate some of the cookies, I'm conveying the idea that she ate a portion, but not the entire portion. The inference from 1 to 3 involves understanding conventions of communicative exchanges, conversations, right? I utter 1, or speakers utter 1, and convey its literal meaning, right? That there's a portion of the cookies that Amanda ate. But in the spirit of cooperation, we understand that the speaker is probably being as informative as possible. That is, to go back, when they say Amanda ate some of the cookies, they are telling us, hey, here is everything you need to know. She ate a portion. If it was all the cookies, they wouldn't have said some. They would have said all. It's not strictly there, but the spirit of cooperation in our conversation is what's helping us make the jump from she ate a portion to she ate a non-whole portion.
Should you call this implication? Is that not simply the literal meaning of some in natural language?
But in natural language, that's the trick.
But
right?
that's, of course, natural language is different from logic, right? So some would mean more than one and not all, I would say, in natural language.
But importantly, there's no problem with taking Amanda ate some of the cookies. In fact, she ate all of them. That's not a contradiction in natural language. It sounds funny.
Really? Yeah.
It sounds funny.
I beg to differ.
But no, the reason...
It's a bit funny, but
Yeah.
it's funny because it is something of a contradiction, right? It makes it funny.
And what Grice is after is he's going to try and explain why it sounds funny. And he doesn't want to go all the way to say, oh, that's just what it non-naturally means. It's that, well, we tend to use it in these kinds of ways in conversations that explains why that sounds weird, but also why we could still technically do it. So again, we can start to see this, right? As if the speaker wanted to convey that Amanda ate all, she would have used all. But because they use some, it's suggesting that it's not all, but just a portion. So what is said, according to Grice, is this conventional elements of what's conveyed. Closely related to the conventional meaning of a sentence. The context can change things, but it's not the only thing that matters here. So what is said is what is literally conveyed. What is implicated is all the rest. And you can start to see this by thinking about the difference between strictly said versus non-strictly said. You can have an utterance implicate something false, but it could still, strictly speaking, be true. He drove home and got drunk. Strictly speaking, as long as he did those two things in any order, it's fine. But it implicates that he got drunk first. What's interesting here is that there's going to be certain things that will govern implicatures, according to Grice. And these are really what he's interested in. He's going to try and articulate the kind of rules that govern implicatures so we can figure out how they work. The other fun thing is that we can cancel implicatures, and we'll cancel them in many different ways. So we could say something like, he hasn't been to prison yet. Importantly, that's not to say he's the sort that gets into trouble. I just was being silly. Whatever you like. Or, I really distrust people who work in the banking industry in general. Again, you can see how this would relate back to the earlier example with A and B and C. So this gets us to Grice's theory of conversational implicature. What this theory is it's a way to articulate the rules that govern implicatures. When do they happen? Why do they have the content that they typically do? Importantly, they're going to be flexible. It's not going to be perfect for every single implicature, but it's going to give us the rough and ready guides for how it works. So, his core idea is that people who are participating in a communicative exchange, a conversation, are going to be governed by a principle that suggests or leads us to maximum efficiency and effect, which he calls the cooperative principle. The cooperative principle, right, tells us make your conversational contributions such as is required at the stage at which it occurs by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which you're engaged. Again, wonderful, lovely natural language there. The long and the short of it is, say what you want to say at the right time in the right place, using the kind of thing that the other people will understand. Don't add extra stuff. Don't add irrelevant stuff. Say what's fucking relevant in a way that people will get. Importantly, this cooperative principle is the umbrella notion. There's going to be maxims, rules, and the maxims tell us how to satisfy the cooperative principle. So the cooperative principle is this very broad one. Hey, if you're engaged in a conversation, be cooperative. Try and be as efficient as you can. To not derail the conversation. So how do we do that? Well, we have 4 maxims. We have the maxim of quality, which is don't say things that you know are false. Don't say things that you believe are false. Don't say things you lack adequate evidence for. The idea is don't add stuff that probably isn't the case. If you're trying to make the communication effective, don't add stuff that you don't have enough evidence for or that you think isn't the case. That's just derailing it right off the bat. Give us contributions that are of good quality. Second one, maximum of quantity. Make your contribution as informative as is required. I don't need to know how the connectives work between the train cars to know when the train is leaving. I want to know that information. All the rest is irrelevant. Especially if you tell me all the rest and don't tell me when does the train leave. You will have plenty of conversations. You can think of examples violating this maxim. I can think of several that I had this morning. Right? So make your contribution as informative as required, and don't add more information than is required. Basically, don't say stuff that is false if you can get away from it. Don't say stuff that's not relevant if you can get away from it. Similarly, relevance is just another way to package quantity, but slightly different, because you might add stuff that you believe is true, that you think is pertinent for whatever reason, but isn't actually immediately addressing the question at hand. If you bring it up, explain why it's relevant. And finally, we have maxims of manner. These are obviously going to be very different depending on relevant circumstances. We can avoid obscurity of expression, avoid ambiguity, be brief, be orderly. Grice also notes, one might need others, other maxims. But these 4 will do the job. Again, rough and ready. Don't say things that are false. Don't add too much or too little. Say stuff that's relevant, and try and say it in an orderly, clean, clear manner. Makes sense if what you think for communication is this cooperative principle. Everybody's trying to be as efficient in communication as possible. Now, importantly, if you take this as the background, implicatures will then be what happens when you start to violate these maxims. Why did you add the clause about, oh, he hasn't gone to jail yet? That's pretty clearly breaking this. So you obviously must be trying to say something else. What is it that you're trying to say? What is the implicature? And why is it an implicature? Because you broke one of the maxims. You flouted the maxim. And in flouting the maxim, you suggested there's further information to convey. So Grice's theory, rough and ready, about conversational implicatures is that you have this cooperative principle governing standard conversation. Then you have these maxims that are lurking there, basically ways to help us satisfy the cooperative principle. And if you follow the principle and the maxims, conversation will flow efficiently. But in fact, what will happen then is that what is conveyed and what is said will be pretty much the same thing. Because that's what all of these are doing. They're pushing you to make what is said what you want to get across. Which is good. That's what you want, right? If everything's going to be efficient. If.
What exactly does he mean by those maxims? That you should try to hold your conversation according to this maxim, or that if you're violating it, that you seem to imply something else? Or
So a little of both. A little of both. What it really is these are what he's taking to be the sorts of rules that govern standard communication, standard conversation. And then if there's going to be violations of these, especially intentional violations of these, that is someone's attempt to implicate some additional stuff. Of course, there'll be cases where they're violated unintentionally. And those could be done inadvertently, inadvertently communicating something, inadvertently implicating something. Or it could just be, oh, I wasn't familiar with how these maxims behave in this context. One of the nice things, if you buy the intentionality-based semantics before, is you should always be able to ask, what did you mean? What was the intent behind this? To make explicit whatever was implicated. That's why it goes hand in hand with the stuff we talked about in the first half. Okay, so in conversation, a speaker may do one of four things regarding the principle and the maxims. You can observe them. This is what we'll do most of the time. You can opt out of them. This is where you say, hey, okay, I'm going to use some phrases. I do not mean to implicate anything. I'm just struggling to articulate myself at the moment. Say. My friend used to try and do this whenever we would go to the bar. He'd say, I'm going to say shit as I get drunk. I don't implicate anything by it. It's like, bullshit, Robert. You absolutely do. You can flout a maxim to the full knowledge of whoever you're talking to. Right? Basically say, add some additional information. Add way too much information. Add some stuff that's totally irrelevant. This is where you're going to do it. Or you can violate a maxim, explicitly break it. The difference here is that the violation often involves ignoring or rejecting the cooperative principle without necessarily giving the person you're talking to a clue that you're doing. So examples will kind of make this a little bit clearer as we go along. But again, you can observe them, you can opt out of them, say these rules don't apply in this case, right? You can flout a maxim, or you can explicitly break a maxim, whether the other party member knows it or not, your conversational partner. So we get this analysis. S implicates Q by saying that P, if and only if, S is presumed to be observing the conversational maxim and the cooperative principle. Right? It's common knowledge between S and S's audience. S could say P while obeying the principle only if S thinks that Q. So that's a real ugly way to say it. Basically, it's, hey, if S and the addressee understand that the reason they're using some particular expression isn't just to convey information, but is also to implicate something. This should look really familiar, because the second clause is the reflexive intention shit all over again. The addressee needs to be aware that S is intending to convey something by using a particular expression. And the thing that is being conveyed won't be part of the expression, won't be what's strictly said, but it will be what's conveyed. It's reflexive intentions all over again. So that actually means that conversations become really quite complex activities. What we're doing when we engage in these is we're figuring out the conventional meanings of expressions, or if it's something that hasn't been used before, the speaker's meaning, right? The intentions that they have. We'll have to figure out how the CP and the maxims are applying, the context in which we're in so that we can understand how to apply the maxims and the principle. Right? Relevant background knowledge. We have to be able to understand that everyone who's in this conversation has done all the previous stuff that we just talked about. Right? And of course, we also have to be such that everybody knows that everybody knows. If any of these fail, people will be put in a position where they won't be able to understand the implicatures. But again, this is just the same stuff that we saw earlier with understanding non-natural meaning applied to not just what's explicitly said, but what else is being conveyed. It's just broadening out the stuff we had before in the first half. So the fundamental assumption for Grice is that a speaker is always observing the cooperative principle in some way, either to get what they want explicitly, what is said, or what they're trying to convey. And observing the maxims at a non-literal level is going to give us conversational implicatures. This is literally what is said plus the implicature giving us the whole of what is communicated. So our addressee is going to assume they're following the maxims. They then ask, why did they break the maxim in this way? Oh, because what they're trying to do is get me to this. Okay, you can get some examples that'll hopefully make it clear. So, 3 classes of implicature. There's one where the maxims are all observed, one where the maxim is violated but is explained by a clash, and finally, one where the maxim is flouted explicitly to generate implicatures. Let's go through these one by one. Implicatures where the maxims are all observed. Right? A says, I'm out of gas. B says, hey, there's a garage around the corner. Strictly speaking, B's utterance here is irrelevant. It's violating the maxim of relevance. So A then has to realize they're not violating the maxim of relevance. In fact, they're mentioning the garage because the garage will have gas. The maxim is what it is that's telling A B's implicature. It's by observing the maxims that B does the implicature here. Do we see the idea? They wouldn't have said this if this wasn't relevant. So this must be relevant. How could this be relevant? Oh, it must be relevant because it's helping me get to where I can get petrol. Another one. Smith doesn't seem to have a girlfriend these days. Oh, well, he's been visiting New York a lot recently. Why would you mention this? Because you're trying to, by not violating any of the maxims, suggest he does have a girlfriend. They're based in New York. The maxims are helping us to get the implicature. Right? So there's our first kind of way you can generate these. Using the maxims to help you get there. We can also have ones where the maxim's violated due to a clash. So A asks B, hey, where does C live? And B says, somewhere in the south of France. Now, why is this a kind of violation of the maxim? Well, obviously the best answer for the question is a city, a street, an address. But B doesn't give that. B just gives this sort of vague region. So in this case, a maxim is violated, the maxim of quantity and of quality, quantity strictly, right? We should give more information, because there's more information required. But B can't give more information because of the maxim of quality. This is the best they know. So they give you the information, B gives A the information to the best that they know. And the implicature here is, I can't be more specific than that. You violate one of the maxims, in this case, quantity, because you're restricted. It clashes with one of the other maxims, quality. Did we see the idea? Does it make sense? If you have to not say things that you don't know or don't have enough evidence for, but you always should answer as explicitly as you can, as best you can, give information as most information, but not too much that you can, then it might be such you can only give really vague information because that's the safest that you are epistemically. What did Feynman do? Well, I don't know a lot about what he did, but I can tell you he was a physicist. That's the best I can deliver. Yeah.
If we then transcend the one conversation and go to the conversation about the conversation, I'm pretty sure most, I don't want to be sexist, but most men know this conversation. A friend, something happens to a friend, you don't know the details, you discuss with your significant other that this has happened, they ask for the details. Where does that fit?
Good. So what's happening there is that one member of the conversation thinks there's an implicature occurring, but in fact, there is no implicature occurring. The other speaker is simply satisfying the maxims. And right, this clash is occurring. I'm giving you the most information I can. This is all I have. And the other member of the party is thinking that is designed to not just convey that, but is in fact designed to implicate something else. I don't want to talk about this, or, oh, it was really bad, or whatever you want. It's a miscommunication about this stuff. There's a misalignment, perhaps, of the context, or a misalignment about how, in this context, the maxims and the principles should be satisfied. That can happen. So one party is reading in as if there's an implicature, but the actual speaker in that case isn't. There's no implicature going. It is simply a clash. And the implicature here is, I don't know any better. I don't know anymore. So again, there's plenty of room to satisfy this kind of thing. What's really interesting is that you could also have cases where A, B, and C are involved in a conversation. A makes an implicature that only B gets because C misunderstands the circumstances. That can happen a lot. So again, we've got where you follow the principles to do an implicature, where one principle is violated, one maxim is violated because of a clash to do an implicature. But you can also flout the maxims to make it explicit, to do an implicature. Right? So you can flout the maxims in different ways. You can flout quality to make something explicit, right? Tehran's in Turkey, isn't it? You say, and London's in Armenia. You're very clearly saying something that you do not believe is true to convey that I was wrong about placing Tehran in Turkey. You're flouting that maxim to make it very clear that the initial claim was utterly false. You can get some other ones, right? He was a little intoxicated. I'm clearly saying something I don't believe to convey your dude was really drunk. So that's quality. You can also do it with quantity, right? Quantity here could be very simple. You might say war is war. What you're really trying to convey is that terrible things happen and we should get over the terrible aspect here. Stating a triviality. It is what it is. That's the kind of thing that's not very helpful in conversation, but it conveys, we just got to suck it up and move on. Either John will come or he won't. You can use this to say something like, I don't really care. There's a very famous one from Grice where you're writing a reference letter. He's writing a reference letter for a student. And he spends a long time in the reference letter talking about how well the student can tie their shoes. And in this case, he's very clearly violating the quantity in order to say this person's an idiot, please don't hire him. But he doesn't say that. He's flouting the maxim to implicitly say that. And the other one's right. One of my favorites, you can flout the maxim of relevance. This, I don't know why this is relations. It should be relevance, right? Oh. It's okay. It's my fault. So you might just say like, well, how about the Mets, right? As a way to just be like, I do not know how to continue this conversation, so can we please change the subject? Like, or shit's got really awkward, right? Oh, isn't the weather lovely? As a very English way to say, I'm not sure, you made a social faux pas, let's move away. And finally, you can flout manner. And manner can be done in a lot of different ways, right? You can modify the expressions. You can very, very snarkily and saucily imply people didn't do something very well, right? You can put this in a very complex way, describing unlocking a door, because you're trying to implicate you think the person you're talking to is a fucking idiot. You can see how this goes. In every one of these cases, it comes back. How is the implicature being done? By messing around with the maxims and the principles. These give us the rules that govern implicatures. So he got drunk and drove home, but not in that order. We can cancel the implicature. Amanda ate some of, but not all of the cookies. Again, canceling the implicature about some. So this is really a way for us to understand Grice's account of conversational implicature. We have this principle and the maxims that govern efficient conversation, and we can convey additional information beyond what is merely said by playing around with these rules. Either just following them, or violating because of a clash, or explicitly flouting them. Explicitly flouting them is often going to be one way for us to very clearly and distinctly convey some additional information. But again, what's underpinning all of this, according to Grice, is intentions, reflexive intentions. We're going to be doing this violations or whatever with the intention of conveying this further information. So what we've kind of done, and I'll wrap up really quickly here, what we've done is we've been talking about this kind of idea of pragmatics. Pragmatics is a notion distinct from semantics. Semantics, what we talked about in the first two lectures, the kind of meaning of expressions. And the thought was, well, maybe that kind of comes first. Semantics concerns language as a representational tool. What does this bit of language represent this? How? Pragmatics is about how we use this representational tool to do some stuff out in the world. Explicitly, following what's said, or some other way, via, say, implicatures. Interestingly, though, if Grice is right, then maybe that kind of formalist-informalist distinction that I drew at the beginning of the second half here isn't quite as deep and dark as we thought. One of them is tracking semantics. What does the tool itself do? And one of them is tracking how we use the tool in multifarious ways. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. Next week, the aim is to try and bring these two kinds of conceptions of language together. And we're going to read a paper called Language and Language, which is literally the formalist conception of language and the informalist conception of language, and how it turns out that they're not that different after all. We can make them both fit together very neatly. So this will be the paper from Lewis. It's worth noting, I've asked you to read the first 3 sections. If you have time, read the whole paper. It's a really good paper. It's very interesting. It can be pretty hard. It'll be a little bit harder than the stuff we did, especially for this week. But again, we're kind of building here to bring together some of the stuff we talked about in weeks 1 and 2 with the stuff from the past 2 weeks. So that's what we're going to do next week. More importantly, beforehand, have a lovely, lovely weekend. And yeah, we'll see you next Friday.